You think you know BTS? You think you've seen every interview, every behind-the-scenes clip, every tear-jerking moment on stage? Well, think again, because what we're about to reveal today goes way deeper than any concert footage or variety show moment you've ever watched. Behind those billion-view music videos, behind those sold-out stadiums, behind those iconic red carpet appearances, there are 7 families who sacrificed everything, who cried in silence, who fought battles nobody ever talks about. What does it feel like to watch your son leave home as a teenager, chasing an impossible dream? What happens when a father who never believed in the idol industry finally breaks down in tears watching his son perform at the United Nations? Which member's grandmother became his secret emotional anchor during the darkest chapter of his trainee life? And here's the real question that's going to haunt you throughout this entire video. Which family story is so heartbreaking, so raw, so deeply personal that even the member himself can barely talk about it without completely falling apart on camera? Trust me, you are not ready for number 1. From parents who worked grueling jobs just to keep the dream alive, to siblings whose quiet love became the fuel behind some of BTS's most legendary songs, these are the untold family stories that shaped the 7 boys who changed the music industry forever. So grab your tissues, lock the door, and settle in, because once we start, there's no turning back. This is the countdown you never expected, and the emotions are about to hit harder than any BTS ballad ever could. Let's get into it.
Number 7. Kim Nam-joon, the genius son who broke his father's dream, then made him cry with pride. Let's kick off this countdown with someone you'd never expect to be on a list about family struggles, the leader himself, Kim Nam-joon, better known as RM. Now, most of you already know RM as the intellectual giant of BTS, the guy with a verified IQ of 148 who taught himself fluent English by binge-watching the sitcom Friends over and over again in his tiny bedroom in Ilsan. But here's what most people don't talk about: the absolute emotional war that happened inside the Kim household before Nam-joon ever set foot in a big-hit entertainment studio. You see, Nam-joon wasn't just smart, he was terrifyingly smart. We're talking about a kid who consistently ranked in the top 1% of the entire nation on standardized academic exams. His scores were so high that teachers, relatives, and neighbors all had the same expectation. This boy is going to Seoul National University. He's going to become a professor, a diplomat, maybe even a judge. And nobody believed that more passionately than his father, Kim Pil-kook. Nam-joon's dad was a traditional Korean father in every sense of the word. He grew up in a generation where academic success was the only real ladder out of an ordinary life, and he poured that belief into his son. Education wasn't just important in the Kim household, it was everything. So imagine being that father. Imagine spending years nurturing your son's intellectual gifts, buying him books, celebrating every perfect test score, building this entire mental blueprint of your child's future. And then one day, your teenage son walks into the living room and says, "Dad, I don't want to go to university. I want to be a rapper." Not a doctor, not a lawyer, not an engineer, a rapper. In early 2000s South Korea, telling your parents you wanted to be a hip-hop artist was basically the same as saying you wanted to throw your entire future into a burning dumpster. The idol industry had no guaranteed path to success. Underground rap was considered a subculture for rebellious kids with no direction, and the statistics were brutally clear. For every one artist who made it, thousands disappeared into obscurity with nothing but broken dreams and empty bank accounts. Nam-joon's father didn't just disapprove, he was devastated. According to what Nam-joon has shared in various interviews and in BTS's own documentary series, the tension at home became almost unbearable. His father refused to support the idea, and there were long stretches where father and son barely spoke to each other. The disappointment wasn't anger, it was fear. His dad wasn't trying to crush Nam-joon's dream out of cruelty. He was terrified that his brilliant son was about to waste the one thing that could guarantee him a stable, respectable life. And here's where Nam-joon's mother, Kim Kyung-gook, quietly became the unsung hero of this entire story. While his father stood firm in opposition, his mother did something that would literally change the trajectory of global pop music forever. She chose to believe in her son. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the most beautifully Korean mother way possible. She was the one who originally bought young Nam-joon those Friends DVD box sets because she saw how desperately he wanted to learn English, even though the family didn't have extra money to throw around on foreign TV shows. She didn't fully understand his obsession with hip-hop. She didn't know anything about the idol trainee system, but she understood one thing. Her son's eyes lit up when he talked about music in a way they never did when he talked about textbooks. There's a moment Nam-joon once described that absolutely guts me every time I think about it. He talked about how his mother found his secret rap notebooks, pages and pages filled with lyrics he'd been writing late at night when he was supposed to be studying. Any other Korean parent might have torn those pages apart, might have dragged their kid to a hagwon for extra cram sessions. But his mother read them. She actually sat down and read her son's lyrics, and instead of being angry, she was moved. She saw the intelligence, the emotion, the raw philosophical depth in his words, and she realized that this wasn't some passing teenage phase. This was who her son truly was. That silent support from his mother gave Nam-joon just enough courage to secretly audition for Big Hit Entertainment after being scouted through an underground rap competition. He was only 15 years old. When he got accepted as a trainee, the household divide became even more painful. His father felt betrayed, and Nam-joon carried the crushing weight of that disappointment every single day during his trainee years. He's spoken about how he used to lie awake at night in the cramped trainee dormitory, wondering if his father would ever forgive him, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. And let's talk about his younger sister, Kim Kyung-min. While the whole family was caught in this emotional tug-of-war, Nam-joon's little sister Kim Kyung-min quietly became one of his most consistent supporters. She didn't make grand gestures, but she was always there, sending him encouraging texts during his trainee days, watching his early performances online, being the sibling who never once made him feel guilty for choosing a different path. Now fast forward to the moment that completely shattered me and will probably shatter you too.
Number 6. Seok-jin, the rich kid label that hid a father's silent sacrifice and a brother's unbreakable bond. Now, before you raise an eyebrow and say, "Wait, Jin, the guy from the wealthy family? What could possibly be heartbreaking about his story?" Hold that thought, because that exact assumption, that comfortable-looking exterior, is precisely what makes Jin's family story one of the most misunderstood and quietly devastating narratives in the entire BTS universe. Let's rip that surface wide open. Yes, it's true that Seok-jin was born into what appeared to be a financially stable household in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province. His father reportedly managed his own business, and compared to some of the other members' backgrounds, Jin's upbringing looked relatively comfortable on paper. But here's what the casual fan never digs into. Comfort doesn't mean the absence of pain, and financial stability doesn't mean emotional stability. Jin's father was a self-made businessman, and being self-made in South Korea's brutally competitive economic landscape meant one thing above all else: sacrifice. Nam-joon's dad feared his son would fail in the entertainment industry, but Jin's father carried a completely different kind of burden. He was a man who had built everything from scratch through sheer willpower and grinding hours, the kind of father who left home before sunrise and came back after his sons were already asleep. Jin has spoken in subtle, careful ways about how his father wasn't absent out of neglect, but absent because he was literally working himself to the bone to make sure his two sons never had to experience the financial insecurity he grew up with. That's a particular kind of loneliness that privileged kids carry in silence. You have everything materially, but the one person you want to sit at the dinner table with is never there. And because your life looks comfortable to the outside world, nobody gives you permission to feel sad about it. Now let's talk about how Jin even ended up in BTS in the first place, because this is one of the wildest origin stories in K-pop history, and it directly connects to his family dynamic. Jin was a university student at Konkuk University, majoring in art and acting. He wanted to be an actor. That was the plan, that was the dream, and his family supported it because acting, while still entertainment, at least had a more respected reputation in Korean society compared to being an idol. Then, one day, and I cannot stress how random and cinematic this is, a big-hit entertainment casting manager spotted Jin literally stepping off a bus near his university campus. The casting manager reportedly chased him down the street because he couldn't believe a face like that was just walking around not being famous. Jin thought it was a scam at first. He almost threw the business card away. But eventually, curiosity won. He auditioned, and suddenly the aspiring actor was being told he'd be training to become a singer and dancer in a boy group. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Jin could barely sing at that point. He had zero dance training. He was essentially a handsome university student with no idol skills whatsoever, being thrown into a trainee system designed to break even the most talented kids. When he told his family, the reaction was complicated. His father, the pragmatic businessman, didn't explode in anger like RM's dad, but he also didn't exactly throw a celebration party. There was a quiet, measured skepticism, the kind that hurts almost more than outright opposition because it comes wrapped in politeness. His father essentially communicated, without saying it directly, "I won't stop you, but I also don't believe this will work." And for someone like Jin, who has always craved validation through love and connection rather than words, that lukewarm response cut deep. But here's where Jin's older brother, Kim Seok-jin, enters the picture and absolutely steals the emotional spotlight. Seok-jin is only about 2 years older than Jin, and their relationship is the kind of sibling bond that Korean dramas wish they could write. While Jin was struggling through his trainee days, learning to dance from absolute zero, being the least experienced member in a group full of naturally gifted performers, battling the constant insecurity of wondering if he deserved to be there, Seok-jin became his emotional lifeline. Jin has shared that his brother would call him late at night during trainee years, not to give grand motivational speeches, but just to talk, just to be normal. Just to remind Jin that no matter what happened in that practice room, no matter how many times the choreographer made him repeat a move until his legs gave out, he was still just Seok-jin, his little brother who used to fight with him over the TV remote and steal the last piece of meat at dinner. That normalcy was everything. When you're a trainee, your entire identity gets consumed by performance metrics. Your vocal range, your dance precision, your visual appeal, your weight, your stamina. You stop being a person and start being a product. Seok-jin's late-night phone calls were the thread that kept Jin tethered to his humanity. And Seok-jin didn't just support from a distance. After BTS debuted and Jin started earning, one of the first things the brothers did together was open a restaurant called Osu Seirum Mushi, a Japanese-style dining establishment that they co-owned. This wasn't just a business venture, it was a symbol. It was two brothers saying, "We built something together, outside of the fame, outside of the idol world, something that's just ours."
Number 5. Min Yoon-gi, the boy from Daegu who starved for music while his mother starved for him. All right, now we're entering the part of this countdown where things start getting genuinely heavy. And if you thought the previous stories tugged at your heartstrings, you are absolutely not prepared for what Min Yoon-gi's family went through. Because while RM's story was about intellectual expectations and Jin's was about quiet emotional distance, Suga's story is about raw, unfiltered poverty. The kind of poverty that doesn't just test your dreams, it tries to bury them alive. Min Yoon-gi was born on March 9, 1993 in Bukgu, Daegu, South Korea. And from the very beginning, life was not kind to the Min family. His parents were working-class people in every brutal sense of the term. We're not talking about we couldn't afford luxury kind of struggles. We're talking about a household where choosing between eating a proper meal and paying for the bus to school was a genuine daily calculation. Yoon-gi's father worked long, exhausting hours, and his mother did the same. And even with both parents grinding through physically demanding jobs, the money was never enough. It was always just barely scraping by, always one bad month away from falling apart completely.
And into this environment, young Yoon-gi discovered the one thing that would simultaneously save his soul and tear his family apart: music. It started with a cheap electronic keyboard. Not a grand piano, not a fancy synthesizer, just a basic second-hand keyboard that somehow found its way into their modest home. And Yoon-gi, this quiet, introverted kid from Daegu who barely spoke to anyone at school, sat down at that keyboard and found something he had never felt before: purpose. He later immortalized this exact moment in his deeply personal solo track, First Love, where he literally raps to the piano itself as if it were a living being, a lover, a parent, the only thing that understood him when the world felt impossibly cold. But here's where the heartbreak begins to compound. When Yoon-gi told his parents he wanted to pursue music, specifically hip-hop and rap, not even the more acceptable classical music route, the reaction was immediate and devastating. His parents didn't just disapprove, they were terrified. And honestly, from their perspective, can you even blame them? They had spent their entire lives fighting poverty, clawing for every won just to keep the lights on, and now their son was telling them he wanted to enter an industry with a success rate of practically zero. In their eyes, Yoon-gi wasn't chasing a dream, he was volunteering for a lifetime of the same poverty they had desperately tried to protect him from. The arguments were intense. Yoon-gi has described in multiple interviews and in his August D mixtape how the household became a battlefield of silence and resentment. His parents wouldn't openly scream, that wasn't their style, but the disappointment hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. His father in particular saw music as a complete waste of time and told Yoon-gi in no uncertain terms that he needed to focus on something practical, something that would actually put food on the table. But Yoon-gi, stubborn and burning with a fire that poverty couldn't extinguish, refused to give up. And this is where his story takes a turn that physically hurts to talk about. To fund his music obsession, teenage Yoon-gi started working part-time jobs, not cushy after-school gigs, real, grueling, body-breaking work. He became a delivery rider, racing through the streets of Daegu on a scooter, delivering food and packages for barely minimum wage. Every single won he earned was split between two impossible priorities: helping his struggling family and saving up to buy time at a local recording studio where he could practice producing beats. He was literally starving himself so he could afford studio hours. There were days when Yoon-gi didn't eat at all, surviving on nothing but water and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, one of his tracks would eventually lead somewhere. And then the accident happened. While working one of his delivery shifts, Yoon-gi was involved in a collision that severely injured his shoulder. The pain was excruciating, and for any normal person, this would have been the moment to stop, to go home, to listen to his parents, and abandon the music fantasy. But Yoon-gi didn't stop. He didn't even tell anyone about the severity of the injury. He hid it. He kept working, kept delivering, kept saving, kept producing, with a shoulder that was literally screaming in agony every time he moved. He hid the injury from Big Hit Entertainment when he eventually became a trainee, because he was terrified that if they found out, they'd cut him from the program. He had already sacrificed too much, his health, his family's approval, his own physical well-being, to let a shoulder injury destroy the one chance he had clawed his way towards. Meanwhile, back in Daegu, something was happening in his mother's heart that Yoon-gi wouldn't fully understand until years later. While his father maintained his stance of quiet disapproval, Yoon-gi's mother was silently falling apart, not because she was angry at her son, but because she could see him destroying himself, and she felt completely powerless. She couldn't support his dream financially because there was no money to give. She couldn't support it emotionally in front of her husband because it would create even more conflict. So she did the only thing she could. She worried in silence. She prayed in silence. She cried in silence. Yoon-gi's older brother, Min Geum-jae, became an unexpected bridge during this period. Geum-jae wasn't as vocal or dramatic about the situation, but he understood his younger brother in a way their parents couldn't.
Number 4. J-Hope, the sunshine boy whose mother sold everything she had just so he could dance. Here's something that's going to mess with your head. The happiest member of BTS, the guy who literally named himself Hope, the human embodiment of sunshine and positive energy, comes from one of the most emotionally gut-wrenching family backstories in this entire group.
And that contrast, that enormous gap between the J-Hope you see on stage radiating pure joy and the Jung Ho-seok who cried alone as a kid in Gwangju wondering if his family's sacrifices would ever be worth it, that's what makes this story hit different on a level you're not ready for. Jung Ho-seok was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, South Korea, a city known not for glitz and glamour, but for resilience, for resistance, for a people who have historically fought harder than anyone else just to be seen and heard. And that fighting spirit ran deep in the Jung household, especially in one person, his mother, Lee Mi-ja. Now, Ho-seok didn't start as a singer. He wasn't writing lyrics in notebooks like Nam-joon or producing beats in cheap studios like Yoon-gi. Ho-seok was a dancer, a phenomenal, naturally gifted, jaw-droppingly talented dancer who discovered his passion at an age when most kids were still figuring out how to tie their shoelaces. He joined a local street dance crew called Neuron, and within that crew, the kid from Gwangju quickly became the one everyone watched. He wasn't just good, he was magnetic. When Ho-seok danced, people stopped walking. He won local competitions, then regional competitions, then started placing in national-level dance battles that put his name on the map in the underground dance community. But talent without money is like a car without fuel. It looks beautiful sitting there, but it's not going anywhere. And the Jung family did not have money. Ho-seok's father, Jung Da-woon, worked tirelessly to keep the family afloat, but Gwangju wasn't Seoul. Opportunities were scarcer, wages were lower, and the cost of nurturing a child's artistic dream, dance academy fees, competition registration costs, transportation to events in other cities, proper dance shoes, proper outfits, all of it added up to a mountain of expenses that the family simply could not afford. This is where Ho-seok's mother became the silent engine behind everything. Lee Mi-ja looked at her son dancing and saw something that transcended practicality. She didn't see a hobby, she didn't see a phase, she saw destiny, and she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She was going to make sure her son had every chance to chase that destiny, even if it meant dismantling her own comfort piece by piece. She started selling things, personal belongings, household items, anything that could be converted into cash to pay for one more month of dance academy, one more bus ticket to a competition in another city, one more pair of shoes that wouldn't fall apart mid-performance. Ho-seok has spoken about this with a pain in his voice that his signature smile can never fully hide. The memory of watching his mother quietly remove things from their home, things that mattered to her, things that made their modest house feel like a home, just so he could keep dancing. She never complained. She never once turned to her son and said, "Look at what I'm giving up for you." She just did it, silently, relentlessly, with the kind of fierce maternal love that doesn't need words because it speaks through actions so loud that words would only cheapen it. And his father, Jung Da-won, carried his own version of this sacrifice. He wasn't as outwardly expressive as Ho-seok's mother, but he was the structural foundation, the man who kept going to work every day, knowing that a significant portion of his already insufficient income was being funneled into an artistic dream that, statistically, had almost no chance of paying off. He didn't fully understand the dance world, he didn't know what a street dance crew really meant, but he trusted his wife's conviction and his son's passion enough to keep showing up, keep working, keep enduring. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed everything. Ho-seok auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment and made it in as a trainee. The family should have been ecstatic, right? Their son was one step closer to the dream. But trainee life is not the dream. It's the nightmare before the dream. Ho-seok moved to Seoul, away from his family, away from Gwangju, away from everything familiar, and was thrown into a system that was nothing like the dance world he knew. Suddenly, he had to sing, he had to learn to rap, he had to fit into a group dynamic with 6 other boys who all had their own strengths and insecurities. The pressure was astronomical, and for the first time in his life, dancing alone wasn't enough. And then came the near elimination. During the trainee period, there was a real possibility that Ho-seok would be cut from the lineup that would eventually become BTS. The details have been shared across various BTS documentaries and interviews. Ho-seok was considered for removal from the group. The boy whose mother had sold her belongings, whose father had worked himself to exhaustion, whose entire family had restructured their lives around this one shot, that boy was about to be told it was all for nothing. When Ho-seok called home during this period, the conversations with his mother were devastating. He couldn't bring himself to tell her directly that he might be cut, but she could hear it in his voice, the fracture, the doubt, the terror of returning to Gwangju as a failure, carrying the unbearable weight of his family's wasted sacrifices. His older sister, Jung Ji-woo, became his emotional anchor during this impossible chapter. Ji-woo, who would later become known to ARMY through her vibrant social media presence, was back then simply a big sister who could feel her little brother breaking from hundreds of kilometers away. She called him constantly, texted him relentlessly, sent him voice messages that oscillated between fierce encouragement and gentle reassurance. You didn't come this far to only come this far. That was the energy Ji-woo poured into Ho-seok when he was standing at the edge of giving up. She reminded him of every competition he'd won, every stage he owned, every time he walked into a room full of doubters and danced them into silence. Ultimately, Ho-seok was kept in the group, a decision that, in hindsight, seems so obviously correct that it's almost laughable anyone considered removing him. But the scars from that period never fully healed.
Number 3, Park Jimin. The perfect son who nearly destroyed himself, while his parents watched helplessly. We're at number 3 now, and I need you to really brace yourself for this one because Park Jimin's family story doesn't hit you like a wave. It hits you like a slow poison that seeps into your chest and doesn't let go. Because this isn't a story about poverty or parental disapproval or skepticism toward the entertainment industry. This is a story about a boy who was so desperate to be worthy of love that he nearly erased himself completely, and 2 parents in Busan who had to watch it happen from 400 kilometers away with absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Jeonjong-gu, Busan, into a family that was, by most accounts, warm, stable, and genuinely loving. His father, Park Pilgwin, was a hardworking man who would later open a small cafe in Busan that became a quiet pilgrimage site for ARMY from around the world. His mother was the emotional heartbeat of the household. Nurturing, expressive, the kind of Korean mother who showed love through food, through fussing over her son's health, through packing extra layers into their bags even when they insisted they didn't need them. And then there was Jimin's younger brother, Park Ji-hyun, who idolized his Hyung in the purest, most uncomplicated way a little brother can. On the surface, this was a family that had it together. No dramatic rifts, no explosive confrontations about career choices, no cold silences at the dinner table. The Jimin origin story actually starts beautifully. He was a brilliantly talented dancer who attended the prestigious Busan High School of Arts, majoring in contemporary modern dance. And he wasn't just attending, he was the top student. Number 1. The best. His teachers recognized his extraordinary physical expressiveness, the way his body could translate emotion into movement with a fluidity that most trained adults couldn't achieve. One of those teachers, seeing potential that extended far beyond the Busan dance scene, encouraged Jimin to audition for big hit entertainment. He did. He got in. And his parents, unlike many other BTS members' families, actually supported the decision. They were nervous, of course, what parent wouldn't be, but they trusted their son's talent and they trusted his character. They sent him off to Seoul with packed bags, home-cooked food, and the kind of tearful, loving send-off that should have been the beginning of a beautiful success story. And it was. Eventually. But between that hopeful goodbye at Busan Station and the global superstardom that awaited, there was a chapter so dark and so painful that it fundamentally altered the Park family's emotional landscape forever. Jimin arrived at Big Hit as a trainee and immediately encountered a reality that his dance trophies and academic accolades had not prepared him for. He was being compared to others in every conceivable way. Not just dancing anymore, but singing, rapping, variety skills, visual appeal, and most devastatingly, physical appearance. The K-pop industry's beauty standards are notoriously brutal, and for Jimin, who had a naturally rounder face and a shorter, more muscular build compared to the tall, angular ideal that dominated idol culture, the message was received loud and clear, even if it was never spoken directly. He wasn't thin enough. He wasn't sharp enough. He wasn't enough. And that's when the starvation began. Jimin has spoken openly about this in interviews, and every single time he does, You can see the residual pain etched across his face. He started restricting his food intake to terrifying extremes. There were periods during his early trainee and debut days where Jimin would eat only one meal over the span of 10 days. 10 days. One meal. Let that number crawl under your skin and sit there, because a growing teenage boy engaged in hours of intense physical dance training every single day was surviving on essentially nothing. He would faint during practice. His body would shake. His vision would blur. But when he looked in the mirror, all he could see was someone who still wasn't good enough, still wasn't thin enough, still didn't deserve to stand on that stage next to the other members. And back in Busan, his parents were experiencing their own private version of hell. Jimin's mother would send care packages to Seoul, packed with his favorite foods, the dishes she knew he loved, the snacks he'd grown up eating at their kitchen table. She'd spend hours preparing these packages, pouring every ounce of her maternal love into sealed containers and padded boxes, and send them north with the hopeful expectation that her son would eat, would be nourished, would feel the warmth of home through every bite. Jimin didn't eat them. He couldn't. The food would arrive and he'd look at it, and the guilt would crash into him from both directions simultaneously. Guilt for not eating what his mother had lovingly prepared, and guilt for even considering eating because his distorted self-image told him he didn't deserve food until he was perfect. Sometimes he'd give the food away to other trainees. Sometimes it would just sit there until it went bad. And his mother, checking in by phone, asking, "Did you eat what I sent you, Jimina?" What could he say? He lied. He told her he ate everything. He told her it was delicious. He told her he was fine. And she knew he was lying. A mother always knows. She could hear the weakness in his voice, the slight tremor that comes from a body running on empty. She could see it during video calls. The hollowed cheeks, the dull eyes, the way her vibrant, bouncy, radiant son was slowly disappearing into himself. But what could she do? She was in Busan. He was in Seoul. He was legally an adult making his own choices. She couldn't drive up to the trainee dorm, sit him down at a table, and force-feed him the way she could when he was 5 years old. The helplessness that Jimin's mother experienced during this period is a specific kind of parental agony that doesn't get talked about enough. The torture of watching your child's self-destruct in slow motion while being physically and circumstantially unable to intervene. His father, Park Pilgwin, handled the pain differently but no less deeply. Pilgwin is described as a man of quiet strength and deep emotion. The kind of father who doesn't make speeches but whose presence alone communicates volumes. During one of BTS's most emotionally raw variety show moments, a handwritten letter from Jimin's father was read aloud, and the contents of that letter cracked open something in Jimin that he had been desperately trying to hold together for years. His father wrote about watching his son on TV and feeling simultaneously the proudest and most frightened he'd ever been. Proud because his Jimin was shining on a stage that the world was watching. Frightened because he could see that his son was hurting in ways that fame could never fix. He wrote about wanting to hold his son, wanting to take the pain away, wanting to be the shield he was supposed to be as a father, but feeling utterly powerless against an enemy he couldn't see or understand. When that letter was read, Jimin didn't just cry. He collapsed. Not dramatically, not performatively, but in the way a human being collapses when every wall they've built around their pain gets demolished in a single moment by the one voice they can't pretend to be strong in front of. The other members surrounded him, held him, but everyone in that room knew that this wasn't a moment any friend or bandmate could fix. This was a son hearing his father's heart break in real time and realizing that his private war against himself had casualties he never intended. His own parents. His younger brother Ji-hyun became a quiet source of grounding during the worst of it. Ji-hyun didn't lecture Jimin about eating. He didn't send long emotional messages about health and self-care. He did something far more powerful. He simply continued to look up to his older brother with the same unconditional admiration he'd always had. In Ji-hyun's eyes, Jimin was never too fat, never too round-faced, never insufficient. He was just young. Just the same incredible older brother who used to dance in their living room and make the whole family laugh. That unchanged gaze from his little brother became a mirror that reflected back to Jimin a version of himself that the industry's brutal standards couldn't distort. Over time, with the support of his members, his family, and his own slowly rebuilding sense of self-worth, Jimin began to heal. He started eating again. He started seeing himself not through the lens of impossible physical perfection but through the lens of artistry, of emotional connection, of the unique ability he possessed to make millions of people feel something just by moving his body across a stage. But the scars remain, and they remain in his family too. His mother still fusses over his eating every single time he visits Busan. His father still watches every performance with a mixture of pride and vigilance, scanning his son's face for any sign that the darkness might be creeping back. And Jimin, who has become one of the most emotionally generous and openly affectionate performers on the planet, carries a specific tenderness that can only come from someone who nearly lost himself and was pulled back from the edge by the love of people who refused to let him disappear. So when you watch Jimin on stage, moving with that ethereal grace that makes 60,000 people hold their breath in unison, remember that the same body that creates such breathtaking beauty once went 10 days without a meal because a boy from Busan couldn't see what the rest of the world saw. And remember that somewhere in a small cafe in Jeonjong-gu, a father is watching, still proud, still scared, still loving his son with the kind of fierce, silent devotion that no spotlight could ever outshine. Number 2, Kim Tae-hyung, the farm boy who almost never auditioned, and the grandmother he could never say goodbye to. We've arrived at number 2, and I want you to stop everything you're doing right now. Put down whatever's in your hands. Because what I'm about to tell you about Kim Tae-hyung, the man the world knows as V, the face that broke the internet, the idol whose ethereal beauty launched 1,000 magazine covers, is rooted in a place so far removed from the glittering world of K-pop that it almost doesn't seem real. This isn't a story that begins in a city. It doesn't start in a dance academy or a music studio or anywhere near the polished, neon-lit infrastructure of the entertainment industry. This story begins in the dirt. Literally. In the farming fields of Gyeochang, a small, quiet, almost invisible rural county nestled in the mountains of South Gyeongsang province, where the air smells like soil after rain and the loudest sound at night is the wind cutting through rice paddies. That's where Kim Tae-hyung grew up. Not Daegu, where he was technically born on December 30th, 1995, but Gyeochang, where his actual childhood happened, where his actual soul was shaped, where the most important person in his entire life lived and breathed and eventually left this world in a way that would shatter him beyond anything fame could ever repair. Tae-hyung's family was poor. Not the we struggled but managed kind of poor. The agricultural, generational, deeply embedded kind of poor where your livelihood depends on the weather, on the harvest, on forces so far beyond your control that planning for the future feels almost laughable. His parents were hardworking people who did what millions of rural Korean parents did during that era. They left. They went to the city to find work, to earn wages that the farmland couldn't provide, to send money back home so their children could eat, go to school, have at least a fraction of the opportunities that city kids took for granted. And when they left, they entrusted their children to the person who had held the family together long before they were even born, Tae-hyung's grandmother. If you want to understand Kim Tae-hyung, not V the idol, not the Gucci model, not the actor, but the actual human being underneath all of it, you have to understand his grandmother. She was everything. She was his mother when his mother couldn't be there. She was his father when his father was working in a distant city. She was his teacher, his comforter, his storyteller, his safe place. In the tiny house in Gyeochang, surrounded by farmland and mountains and a quietness that Seoul could never comprehend, Tae-hyung's grandmother raised him with the kind of old-world Korean love that doesn't translate neatly into modern language. She fed him from the crops she grew with her own weathered hands. She walked him to school on dirt roads. She stayed up with him when he was sick, whispering folk remedies and prayers into the dark room. She was the one constant in a childhood defined by the absence of his parents. Not because they didn't love him, but because poverty forced them to love him from a distance. And Tae-hyung adored her with a ferocity that only a child raised by a grandparent can understand. There's a specific kind of bond that forms when a grandparent becomes a primary caregiver. It's deeper than regular grandparent affection because it carries the weight of parental responsibility fused with the tenderness of generational wisdom. His grandmother wasn't just spoiling him with treats on weekends. She was waking up before dawn to make sure he had breakfast. She was stretching pennies to buy him school supplies. She was sacrificing her own comfort so he could have a slightly better version of the life she'd always known. Now, here's the part of Tae-hyung's origin story that sounds like it was written by a screenwriter on heavy medication. He almost never became an idol. He literally almost never auditioned. When Big Hit Entertainment held auditions in Daegu, Tae-hyung wasn't there for himself. He had gone to accompany a friend who wanted to try out. Tae-hyung was just the supportive buddy, the moral support, the guy standing in the hallway waiting for his friend to finish. But someone, a staff member, a casting associate, the universe itself, call it whatever you want, spotted him and told him he should audition too. On a complete whim, with zero preparation, zero training, zero expectation, Kim Tae-hyung walked into that audition room and sang. And he got accepted. His friend didn't. Just let the sheer cosmic absurdity of that sink in for a moment. The person who would become one of the most famous faces in modern music history was never supposed to be in that room. He was supposed to be standing outside, scrolling through his phone, waiting for someone else. If that staff member had looked the other way, if Tae-hyung had been standing 2 meters to the left, if he'd decided to stay home in Jeocheong that day, BTS as we know it would not exist. But here's what nobody talks about. When Tae-hyung got accepted, his parents didn't know. He hadn't told them he auditioned because he never planned to audition. And when he finally called home to tell them he'd been selected as a trainee for an entertainment company in Seoul, the reaction was complicated in the most painful way. His parents, who were already stretched impossibly thin trying to earn enough in the city to support the family back in Jeocheong, now had to process the idea of their eldest son moving to Seoul to pursue one of the most uncertain career paths in existence. The fear wasn't about disapproval, it was about resources. Could they afford to support this? What if it didn't work out? What about his younger siblings, Kim Yeon-jin and Kim Eun-jin, who still needed to be fed and educated? And his grandmother, who had poured every remaining drop of her life's energy into raising this boy. She now had to let him go. At an age when most grandmothers are being taken care of by their grandchildren, Tae-hyung's grandmother had to watch the child she'd raised from infancy pack a small bag and leave for a city she'd probably never visit, to chase a dream she couldn't begin to fathom, in an industry she knew nothing about. The goodbye between them is something Tae-hyung has never fully described in public. And maybe that's because some moments are too sacred, too fragile, too enormous to compress into words on a talk show. But the fragments he has shared tell you everything. The way she held his hands at the door, the way she told him to eat well and dress warmly, the way she stood watching until he disappeared down the road, the same road she'd walked him down to school 1,000 times before. When Tae-hyung arrived in Seoul and began trainee life, the distance from Jeocheong wasn't just physical, it was dimensional. He went from a world of fields and mountains and his grandmother's cooking to a world of mirrored practice rooms and performance evaluations and a relentless pressure cooker designed to manufacture idols. The culture shock was immense, and Tae-hyung's coping mechanism was uniquely his. He retreated into his own imagination, developed his signature for depersonality that fans would later adore, built an entire internal universe where the quiet country boy could survive in the loud, demanding chaos of the K-pop machine. But no matter how far he traveled, no matter how bright the stage lights became, the thread connecting him to Jeocheong, to his grandmother, never loosened. He called her whenever he could. He sent money home the moment BTS started earning. He talked about her in interviews with a softness in his voice that was completely different from every other vocal register he possessed. Then she passed away, and the world watched Kim Tae-hyung break in a way that no amount of fame or fortune or screaming fans could cushion. The timing was devastating, as it always is with loss, because death never waits for a convenient moment. Tae-hyung has never publicly detailed the exact circumstances in full, and that privacy deserves to be respected. But what he has shared, through his music, through his tears on stage, through the raw, unguarded moments captured in BTS's behind-the-scenes footage, paints a picture of a grief so total, so consuming that it redefined his entire emotional architecture. He cried on stage, not the controlled, photogenic tears of a performer having a moment. The ugly, heaving, uncontrollable sobs of a grandson who never got enough time, who carried the guilt of every missed phone call, every holiday spent on tour instead of in Jeocheong, every birthday where he was on the other side of the planet instead of sitting at her kitchen table. The other members have spoken about how Tae-hyung's grief was one of the most difficult things they've ever had to witness as a group, because there was nothing they could do. You can't choreograph away that kind of pain. You can't produce a track that fills that kind of silence. You can only stand next to someone and let them know that they're not alone, even though the specific loneliness of losing the person who raised you is a room that nobody else can enter. Tae-hyung channeled his grief into his artistry in ways that are almost painfully transparent once you know the backstory. The depth of emotion in his vocal performances, the way he lingers on certain notes as if he's reaching for someone who's no longer there, the faraway look in his eyes during ballads that fans often attribute to his mysterious aura. It's not mystery. It's memory. It's a boy from a farming village in Gyeochang standing on the biggest stages in the world, singing to the woman who made him possible, knowing she can't hear him anymore but hoping, with every fiber of his being, that somehow, somewhere, she's still watching. She walked him to school. He walked onto the world stage. And the distance between those two journeys is measured not in kilometers, but in the immeasurable, unrepayable debt of a grandchild who knows that everything he is, everything he has, everything he will ever become, started with a pair of weathered hands in a farmhouse that the world will never see. Number 1. Jeon Jung-kook. The child who left his mother's arms at 15 and grew up in front of the entire world. This is it. Number 1. The story I told you at the very beginning would make you cry, and I meant every word of that warning. Because Jeon Jung-kook's family story isn't about poverty. It isn't about disapproval. It isn't about sacrifice in the traditional, dramatic sense that makes for a compelling headline. It's about something far more universal, far more intimate, far more quietly devastating. It's about a mother who had to let go of her baby before he was done being a baby, and a boy who had to become a man in front of millions of strangers because he never got the chance to do it quietly, safely, at home. Jeon Jung-kook was born on September 1, 1997, in Mandeokdong, Busan, the youngest son of Jeon Won-hak and his wife, the baby brother of Jeon Yong-hyun, the magne of a modest, close-knit Busan family that revolved around warmth, normalcy, and the uncomplicated love that small, tight families do better than anyone else. And Jung-kook was, by every account, an extraordinarily loved child. Not spoiled, not pampered with luxury, just loved. The kind of love where your mom packs your lunch with extra side dishes because she knows you'll share with friends. The kind where your dad works hard but always makes time for weekend outings. The kind where your older brother lets you win at video games even though you both know he's better. That was Jung-kook's world. Small, safe, complete. Then he turned 14, auditioned for the televised singing competition Superstar K, and everything changed forever. He didn't win. He didn't even make it particularly far in the competition. But something happened that nobody in the Jeon family could have anticipated. Talent scouts from 7 different entertainment companies saw his audition and offered him a spot as a trainee. 7 companies. For a kid who hadn't even finished middle school. A kid whose voice was still changing. A kid who still had baby fat on his cheeks and looked at the world with the wide, unguarded eyes of a child who hadn't yet learned that the world could be cruel. Out of those 7 offers, Jung-kook chose Big Hit Entertainment. The story goes that he made this decision after watching RM perform. Something about the way Nam-joon carried himself resonated with the 14-year-old boy from Busan, and in a moment of instinct that would alter the trajectory of global music, Jung-kook picked the smallest, least prestigious company on the list simply because he felt something. But choosing Big Hit meant choosing Seoul. And choosing Seoul meant leaving Busan. And leaving Busan meant leaving his mother. Let me slow down here because this is the part where most people scroll past too quickly, and I refuse to let you do that. Jung-kook was 15 years old when he moved to Seoul to become a trainee. 15. In most countries, 15-year-olds are worrying about homework and crushes and whether they'll make the school sports team. They're eating dinner with their families every night. They're being tucked in, maybe not literally anymore, but in that invisible, ambient way where a mother's presence in the next room is its own form of tucking in. Jung-kook didn't have that. At an age when his brain was still developing, when his body was still growing, when his emotional toolkit for handling stress and loneliness and self-doubt was still being assembled. He was dropped into a trainee dormitory in a massive, unfamiliar city, surrounded by older boys he didn't know, and told to sing, dance, and perform at a professional level or risk being sent home with nothing. The homesickness was immediate and merciless. Jung-kook has spoken about this period with a rawness that cuts through every idle veneer. He cried every single night during his early trainee days. Not occasional, I'm a little sad tears. Every night. He would lie in his dorm bed, this 15-year-old kid from Busan who should have been sleeping under his mother's roof, and he would cry himself to sleep because the loneliness was so crushing, so physically overwhelming, that his body had no other way to process it. He missed his mother's cooking. He missed his brother's teasing. He missed the sound of his father coming home from work. He missed the specific smell of his family's apartment, the particular way the light came through his bedroom window in Mandeokdong, the texture of the blanket on his own bed. These are details that adults learn to compartmentalize, but Jung-kook wasn't an adult. He was a child experiencing separation anxiety at a developmental stage where attachment to home is still a biological need, not just an emotional preference. And here's what absolutely wrecks me about his parents' side of this story. They let him go. Not because they didn't love him. Not because they were pushing him toward fame. They let him go because they could see the fire in their son's eyes, the talent in his voice, the potential in his small frame, and they made the most agonizing decision any parent can make. They chose his future over their own comfort. Jung-kook's mother, in particular, carried a grief during those early years that she buried deep beneath the surface of supportive phone calls and encouraging text messages. Every time she hung up the phone after hearing her youngest son's voice, thinner, tireder, older than it should have been, she was left alone with the silence of a house that was missing its most vibrant presence. His bedroom in Busan sat empty. His shoes by the door were gone. The chair at the dinner table where he used to sit and inhale food like only a teenage boy can was vacant. These are the micro losses that accumulate into a mountain of parental grief that nobody ever talks about because the child is alive. The child is pursuing his dream. The child is fine. So what right does a mother have to mourn? Every right. She had every right. Because she wasn't mourning a death. She was mourning a childhood. Her son's childhood was ending years too early, and it was ending without her there to witness it, guide it, or soften its hardest edges. Instead, the 6 older members of BTS became Jungkook's surrogate family. RM became the intellectual big brother. Jin became the nagging, caring oldest Hyung who made sure he ate. Suga became the quietly protective presence. J-Hope became the energy that kept him smiling. Jimin became the closest thing to a same-age friend. And V became the soulmate-level companion whose bond with Jungkook transcended typical friendship. These 6 men raised Jungkook. They watched his voice drop. They watched him grow taller. They saw his first heartbreak, his first moment of self-doubt as an adult, his first realization that fame comes with chains as much as wings. They taught him things his parents should have been there to teach him. How to manage emotions, how to navigate relationships, how to handle criticism, how to be a man. And Jungkook's solo song, Begin, from the Wings album is his love letter to this reality. In that song, he essentially tells the other 6 members, I was nothing when I came to you. I was a scared child from Busan who couldn't stop crying. And you made me into someone. You didn't just give me a career. You gave me a second family when I was too young to survive without one. But here's the thing that elevates Jungkook's story to number 1 on this list. The thing that makes it the most universally heartbreaking entry in this entire countdown. The irreversibility of it all. RM's father eventually came around. Jin's father eventually expressed pride. Suga bought his parents a house. J-Hope honored his mother through song. Jimin healed from his self-destruction. Tae-hyung carries his grandmother's memory as sacred fire. But Jungkook can never get his teenage years back. His mother can never unmiss his 15th birthday in her own home. His father can never unwatch his son grow up through a phone screen instead of across the dinner table. His brother can never unlose those years of daily, ordinary, irreplaceable sibling life. The time is gone. Permanently, irreversibly, non-negotiably gone. And the worst part, the part that makes Jungkook cry the hardest whenever this subject comes up, is that he wouldn't change it. He can't change it and he wouldn't change it, and the guilt of that truth is its own kind of torture. Because how do you tell your mother, I'm grateful I left you, because leaving you made me who I am? How do you hold that gratitude and that grief in the same hand without being crushed by the weight of both? During BTS concerts, there are moments, and if you've been to one, you know exactly what I'm talking about, when the camera finds Jungkook during an emotional song, and you can see something flicker across his face that has nothing to do with the performance. It's not choreography. It's not stagecraft. It's the face of a boy looking out at a sea of 70,000 people screaming his name and thinking, somewhere in the deepest, most private chamber of his heart, I wonder what mom is doing right now, because that 15-year-old kid from Busan is still in there. Underneath the sold-out stadiums and the billion stream records and the six-pack abs and the global superstardom, he's still in there, still missing home, still hearing his mother's voice on the phone saying, eat well, Jung-kook, dress warm, I love you, still lying in a dorm bed in Seoul, a city that gave him everything the world could offer except the one thing a child actually needs, his mother in the next room. And that's why this story is number one. Not because it's the most dramatic, not because it involves the most extreme hardship, but because it's the most human. Every single person watching this, every single person reading these words, has a version of this story somewhere inside them. A moment when you had to leave someone you loved in order to become someone you needed to be. Jung-kook just did it younger, louder, and in front of the entire planet. So the next time you see Jeon Jung-kook smile, that big, bunny-toothed, eye-crinkling, hearts, and there you have it. 7 members, 7 families, 7 stories that prove the same heartbreaking truth. Behind every spotlight, there's a shadow. Behind every standing ovation, there's a silent sacrifice. Behind every global superstar who makes it look effortless on stage, there's a mother who cried alone in a kitchen, a father who swallowed his pride in silence, a grandmother who watched from a farmhouse window, a brother who kept the faith when nobody else would. We started this countdown with RM, whose genius-level IQ couldn't solve the equation of earning his father's approval. We walked through Jin's world, where wealth meant nothing compared to the emotional distance between a son and a workaholic dad. We bled through Suga's story, where an empty stomach and a broken shoulder were the price tags on a dream that Tae-hyung said was worthless. We felt J-Hope's mother packing away her belongings one by one, building a runway for her son's destiny with the wreckage of her own comfort. We sat with Jimin's parents in Busan, helplessly watching their perfect son try to erase himself into someone else's definition of enough. We stood in a farmhouse in Gyeochang with Tae-hyung's grandmother, the woman who held that boy's universe together with weathered hands and a love so deep it didn't need soul to validate it. And we ended with Jung-kook, a 15-year-old child who walked away from everything safe and warm and familiar to become something the world had never seen, leaving a mother-shaped hole in his chest that no amount of Grammy nominations or Billboard records could ever fill. These aren't just celebrity stories. These are family stories. Your family stories, dressed in different clothes and speaking a different language but carrying the exact same weight. Because every parent who has ever watched their child chase a dream they didn't understand has felt what RM's father felt. Every mother who has ever packed a lunch knowing her child might not eat it has felt what Jimin's mother felt. Every grandmother who has ever stood at a doorway watching her grandchild leave has felt what Tae-hyung's grandmother felt. BTS didn't become the biggest act on the planet because of choreography or marketing or algorithms. They became the biggest act on the planet because 7 ordinary families made extraordinary choices rooted in the most ancient, most powerful, most unglamorous force in human history, love. Messy, scared, imperfect, sometimes silent, sometimes suffocating, but always, always relentless love. So the next time you stream a BTS song, the next time you vote for them on some award show, the next time you hold up an army bomb in a stadium full of purple light, remember that you're not just celebrating 7 idols. You're celebrating the 7 families who built them, brick by painful brick, tear by quiet tear. And if this video made you feel something, if you cried, if your chest got tight, if you had to pause and take a breath, then do one thing for me. Call your mom. Call your dad. Call your grandparents. Call the person who sacrificed for you when you were too young or too blind or too busy to notice. And tell them what Nam-joon told his father, what Ho-seok told his mother, what Yoon-gi wrote into every bar of August D, what Tae-hyung whispers to the sky every time he looks up. Thank you. Thank you for believing in me before I gave you any reason to. That's all for today. If this video hit you as hard as it hit me while making it, smash that like button because the algorithm needs to know this story matters. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Ring that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive like this, and drop a comment telling me which member's family story wrecked you the hardest. I genuinely want to know. Until next time, stay grateful, stay kind, and never forget where you came from. Because the people who made you possible are still watching, still praying, still loving you from whatever corner of the world they call home. Peace.